We see the longship cutting through winter fog. We see the warrior's breath crystallizing in the frozen air. We see the axe dripping with melted frost. But that's only half the story. The half they want you to see. Because every shield wall that shatters on a December morning, every fortress that burns while snow falls around it, has a second story. The one that begins when the screaming stops and the silence becomes unbearable. It's the story of the women, the noble women, the queens, the abbesses, the daughters of lords whose entire world is destroyed in a single frozen day. You think you know the Vikings? You've seen the History Channel specials, the romantic sagas, the Hollywood heroics. But you don't know what happened in those long winter nights after the battle ended. When the dragon banner flew over smoking ruins and the temperature dropped below freezing, what became of a highborn lady whose husband's fortress had fallen? She wasn't just a casualty of war. She became the prize. She became property. She became currency in a trade network that stretched from the ice fields of Iceland to the scorching markets of Baghdad. Tonight, we're revealing 5 documented fates of noble women who fell into Norse hands during the harshest winters of the Viking Age. And I promise you, these stories will haunt you long after this video ends. Before we descend into this frozen hell, subscribe to Flow of History if you believe these forgotten voices deserve to be heard. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, because this history belongs to all of us. Now, this isn't saga fantasy or Hollywood invention. Every claim here is built on hard archaeological evidence. Isotopic analysis from the Heathwood Viking Cremation Cemetery published in Nature Journal in 2022, the textual scholarship of Dr. Claire Downham in her work Viking Kings of Britain and Ireland, and recent DNA studies from the journal Cell that rewrote what we thought we knew about Viking expansion. Now back to the winter of 867 AD. For 2 years, a storm has been ravaging Anglo-Saxon England. But this storm has sails. It's called the Great Heathen Army, and it's no mere raiding party. This is an invasion force thousands strong, led by the sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. They've already shattered the kingdom of East Anglia, tying King Edmund to a tree and filling him with so many arrows he resembled a porcupine. Now they've conquered Northumbria, and their armies march with impunity through a landscape of absolute terror. Perched on the cliffs of the North Sea coast, the monastery of Coldingham sits directly in their path. And inside its walls, Abbess Ebbe the Younger faces an impossible choice. But what she's about to do will echo through history as one of the most extreme acts of defiance ever recorded. Picture Coldingham in late autumn 867, when the first snow begins to fall. The monastery was founded 2 centuries earlier by Saint Ebbe the Elder, an exiled Northumbrian princess, and has long been a center of royal patronage and immense wealth. To the Norse warriors, these coastal monasteries weren't holy places. They were undefended banks and symbols of an enemy faith ripe for destruction. News of the great heathen army's approach reached Abbess Ebbo long before their sails appeared on the frozen horizon. The tales of what they did to priests, and especially to nuns, were well known throughout the Christian North. For the women of Coldingham, capture meant a fate of ritualized rape and enslavement, a violation of both their bodies and their sacred vows to Christ. Ebbe knew resistance was futile. No prayer would stop the axe. No stone wall would hold back the horde. According to the chronicles of Roger of Wendover and Matthew Paris, who recorded a story that had clearly been passed down for generations, Ebbe gathered her panicked sisters in the chapter house on a night when their breath fogged the air. She delivered a sermon not of hope, but of grim resolve. Their souls, she argued, were inviolate, but their bodies were about to become a battlefield. Then she offered them a terrible way out, a way to claim one final defiant act of control over their own fate. What happened next is almost too horrific to comprehend, yet it's documented in multiple medieval sources. In the horrified silence of that frozen chapter house, Abbess Ebbe produced a sharp razor. Before the eyes of all her nuns, she brought the blade to her own face and sliced away her nose and upper lip, transforming her features into a bloody ruin. Through her mangled mouth, she commanded her sisters to do the same. to destroy the beauty that would make them prizes, to make themselves physically repulsive and therefore spiritually untouchable. One by one, in an act that defies modern comprehension, the nuns followed her example. The chapter house became a scene of ritualized self-mutilation, an act of extreme piety and desperate courage. Can you imagine the sound of it? The cold air filled with muffled sobbing, the scrape of metal on flesh, the drip of blood on stone floors? This was their winter of defiance. When the Viking warriors finally smashed down the monastery gates and burst into the priory expecting trembling, beautiful women to claim as spoils, they were confronted instead by a choir of the disfigured. Faces streaming with blood, noses and lips destroyed, these women stared back at them with unwavering eyes. The Norsemen's lust turned to shock, then to disgust, and finally to pure, murderous rage. They had been denied their spoils. They had been cheated of the brutal prize they felt was their right by conquest. In their fury, they dragged every monk and every mutilated nun into the main church building, barricaded the heavy wooden doors from the outside, piled timber against the walls, and set it ablaze. The entire community of Coldingham was burned alive in the winter cold, but not every noble woman had the luxury of choosing death over dishonor. To understand the second fate, we must travel to Dublin in the 9th century. But this isn't the Dublin you know. This was Dublin, the Black Pool, a Viking fortress and the undisputed center of the North Atlantic slave trade. Founded as a long fort, a ship camp, in 841, it had grown into a bustling, brutal metropolis whose wealth was built entirely on human bodies. Ruling this slave empire were two of the most formidable sea kings of the age, Amlaib the White and Imar. Modern historians widely accept that Imar was the very same man known in English sources as Ivar the Boneless, one of the leaders of the Great Heathen Army. This means the campaigns in England and Ireland were linked, a vast enterprise of conquest and exploitation run by a single terrifying family. In the year 870, these two kings launched their most ambitious campaign. Taking the bulk of their Dublin fleet, they crossed the Irish Sea to Britain and laid siege to Alt-Clut, the fortress on Dumbarton Rock. This was the ancient capital of the Britons of Strathclyde, a kingdom that had resisted Anglo-Saxons and Picts for centuries. The fortress was considered impregnable, built on a volcanic plug surrounded by water. For 4 agonizing months through winter, the Britons held out, but Amlaib and Imar simply waited, knowing that winter worked in their favor. As the Irish annals of Ulster record with chilling precision, the fortress's well eventually ran dry. The defenders, dying of thirst and hypothermia, were forced to surrender. The Vikings sacked the citadel with systematic brutality, and in 871 they returned to Dublin in triumph. The annals give us a specific chilling number: 200 ships. They were filled with plunder and a great host of captives, Angles and Britons and Picts. Think about that. 200 longships, each capable of carrying dozens of chained human beings in their holds. This was an industrial-scale operation, a human trafficking network that would make modern cartels envious. Imagine the scene through winter fog. The wife of King Artgal of Alt-Clut, his daughters, the wives and children of his chieftains. One day they are the elite of a proud kingdom, wearing fine wool and sleeping in heated halls. The next, they are human cargo crammed into the stinking hold of a ship, their world reduced to darkness, fear, and the rocking of frozen waves. Their breath creates ice crystals on the wooden planks above their heads. Upon arrival in Dublin's harbor, their nightmare would only intensify. They would be marched through snow-covered streets to the slave markets, the location of which archaeologists have identified in the Woodkey area of the modern city. There they would be stripped, cleaned with frigid water, and paraded before potential buyers while their bodies still bore the bruises of capture.